Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for coming. And I want to thank my colleagues and all of our staffs for the hard work that they have been and are continuing to put into this idea of a budget resolution. And today we wanted to announce our intention to introduce a budget and to share with you an overview of some of the features that this budget will contain. Let me start with a little bit of context, if I could, and remind everybody that this year government spending reaches 24% of GDP. This is twice the level that the government reached as a percentage of GDP during the huge expansion that occurred during the New Deal. More recently, if you look in nominal terms, federal spending has doubled since just the year 2000. This, of course, has led to ever-increasing annual budget deficits. In 2006, our budget deficit was about 1.9% of GDP. 2007, it was only 1.2% of GDP, but last year, our deficit was fully 10% of the size of our total economic output. This year, it's over 9%, and this government is borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that we're spending. Annual deficits, of course, become the accumulated debt as bonds are issued to cover them. Interestingly, for decades, our debt was relatively stable as a percentage of our GDP, around 40% in 1988, 41% of GDP in 2008. But at the end of this fiscal year, our debt will be 69% of GDP, and we are on a trajectory to soon reach debt of 100% of GDP, a level that is enormously problematic. And let me touch on some of the perils of this kind of deficit and debt accumulation. The fact is the persistence of these deficits and the recent dramatic increase in their size, these are simply indications that we're currently on an unsustainable fiscal path. And I say unsustainable because absent the kind of fundamental reforms and discipline on spending that we need, these deficits will only grow, both in absolute terms and as a percentage of GDP. In addition to that, the debt that results from these annual deficits will increasingly cause slower economic growth, higher taxes, and less security. Increased government spending means a reduction in the amount of private investment, means higher taxes on the American people. It means less economic growth, fewer opportunities, and a lesser quality of life. The good news is that these deficits represent a political problem, a political challenge. They are not in themselves caused by an economic challenge. They're political in nature, and so there's a political solution. Simply put, deficits are not inevitable. They can be stopped if we in Congress have the will to stop them. I think we were sent here by our constituents to exercise leadership and to demonstrate a willingness to solve the problems we've been asked to solve, and this is one of them. So we set out a goal for this budget, and the goal was to demonstrate that it is in fact possible to balance the budget within 10 years without raising taxes. And in fact, we could do this by adopting, in part, by adopting pro-growth tax policies that will accelerate the recovery, create job growth, and create the broad base on which the revenue will be raised to balance the budget. I'll share with you a few of the highlights. This budget that we will be introducing soon will balance in 2020 and demonstrate a modest surplus in 2021. It will reduce the publicly held debt to about 52% of GDP by 2021, down from a level that's already nearly 70% of GDP. It does this in part by lowering spending to 18.5% of GDP, which is the level at which historical revenue has come into the government. And I think it's just very important that we get started. Let me mention one other thing. It's my view that a permanent solution to the fiscal challenges that we face will require broader reforms than what we have in this budget. For instance, ultimately we need to reform the Social Security program. We need to reform Medicare. But this budget represents what we think of as a necessary first step. It reaches a balance. It does so within the foreseeable future, within 10 years in fact, and in the process I hope that it'll demonstrate and earn for us a restored trust in our ability to grapple with the big problems that we face. This, in turn, will buy us the time we need for the long-term reforms for our federal budget. You know, I'm not aware of any country that's ever dramatically grown its government generated massive spending beyond its means, run up huge deficits, accumulated massive debt, monetized part of it, and then lived happily ever after. We won't be the first. We're either going to stay on this current path and suffer the consequences that will come from this very irresponsible spending, the consequences of a weak economy and diminished opportunity at best, or we're going to depart from this path and adopt the fiscal discipline that our constituents expect of us, adopt the pro-growth reforms that will allow our economy to recover and allow us to enjoy another great American century. But the time to choose is now, and the time is running out. With that, I will introduce my colleague, Senator DeMint.
Thank you, Senator Toomey. All 47 Republican senators have co-sponsored a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. And that, once it's ratified by the states, would take effect in about 5 years. So we're projecting, if we pass that this year, that with 2 or 3 years to ratify, we're looking at 6 to 8 years that the budget needs to be balanced. In order to have any credibility, we felt as a group that it was important for us to show as senators that we can balance our federal budget within 10 years, and we want an opportunity to do that. We want to have this as part of the discussion and the debate on the floor, and we want to have a vote on this to demonstrate our support for this. There are a lot of details of this plan that we'd like to talk more about. We won't today, but just one particularly is Medicare. Senator Toomey has allocated more money for Medicare than the President did. In fact, the President is planning on cutting 35% of what Medicare pays doctors over the next several years, which is completely unrealistic. If you want to look at a real cut in Medicare, look at what the President's planning at this point. This budget shows that we can balance in 10 years without any draconian cuts. All of the reforms that a number of us have been behind for Social Security and Medicare do not affect anyone over 55. So we don't anticipate, no matter what we do with reforms, for there to be anything in this 10-year window that has to be done. Although I think there are a lot of alternatives that can be created for those programs that would give people better choices. But as far as taking anything away, we don't envision that. Neither did Paul Ryan's plan. The 10-year window is consistent. I think most of us here support Paul Ryan's plan in the 10-year window, but this is a plan that demonstrates what our goal was. We can balance our federal budget within 10 years and leave America better off for it. One point about a balanced budget requirement, a balanced budget amendment. If we cannot decide as a government, as a Congress, as a Senate, that we will balance our budget within 10 years, then we are deciding that we're going to bankrupt our country. It is that serious. This idea that we can have some cuts and go on is fallacious. If we look at what Standard & Poor's and investment houses and the IMF and other countries are looking in on us, and they want to see the political will that we can balance our budget. The budget we're presenting today demonstrates that political will. Who we have next here?
Thank you, Senator Toomey and Senator DeMint. The reason I came here to Washington is because we're bankrupting America. You know, watching Washington from afar, I mean, I knew this place was broken. I knew the budget process was broken, and nothing in the 4 months since I've been here has disabused me of that belief. Evidence of the fact is the Democrats, when they controlled both houses and the presidency, couldn't even pass a budget, or didn't pass a budget in 2011. And right now, I sit in the Budget Committee. By law, we should have seen a budget proposal from the Democrats by April 15th. We haven't seen one. So certainly as a manufacturer, I realize if you're going to produce any product, and that in this case it's a budget, you need to have a process. And you need to have a process in control, and we simply don't have that. The other thing we need is we need a partner. I think one of my greatest disappointments is we have not seen leadership since I've arrived here. We need a president to lead. And having a president offer a 10-year budget that will increase our national debt by over $13 trillion simply is not leadership. And we also need our Democratic colleagues in the Senate and in the House to get serious. And evidence of their lack of seriousness is the fact that they only offered to cut $4 billion from from a budget deficit that totaled $1,650 billion. I mean, that's simply not serious. So I am happy to co-sponsor this budget that Senator Toomey has proposed. It is a serious budget. It shows, it proves that it is possible to balance a budget within 10 years. It also shows that everything eventually will have to be on the table. We simply can't take a look at a 15% slice of our budget and think we're going to balance it from that. So again, I'm happy to be part of this process, and I congratulate Senator Toomey for all the hard work in producing this template. Thank you.
The growth in spending that we've seen from the federal government is astounding when you look at it in our roughly 200-year historical perspective. Between 1792 and the early 1930s, the federal government spent more than, it never spent more than 1.5 to 4% of GDP in any year, with only two exceptions. It's a brief period of time during and in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, and during and in the aftermath of World War I, when we broke free of that range temporarily, the 1.5 to 4% of GDP range. Since the early 1930s, when we broke into the double digits for the first time, we've never gone back. And that growth has just continued to escalate until we are where we are today, where we're spending more than 25% of GDP every single year. The idea of a balanced budget amendment coupled with budget plans like this one that will balance the budget within 10 years are absolutely essential. Now, it may come as no surprise to some that not everyone in the Senate, not everyone in the House is necessarily going to agree with every element of this. If they don't, I hope they will support it nonetheless, because they recognize that it's a plan and we have to have a plan to balance it. And if they can't do that, then they should come up with their own and explain why theirs works. But we do need a plan to balance our budget within the next decade, and this one does that. And I'm proud to sign my name to it. I'm proud to call Pat Toomey my friend, and I applaud him for his efforts in developing this. My hat goes off to him and to his staff. With that, I'll turn the time over to my colleague, Senator Rubio from Florida.
I don't have much more to add to what's been said other than to congratulate and thank Senator Toomey for taking leadership on this issue. And, you know, this whole debate about spending and the debt is a great opportunity to stop for a moment and remind ourselves of what an amazing story our country is, how unlikely it really is in the history of the world that people could govern themselves and provide for ourselves the political liberties we now have, and also the economic empowerment that Americans have enjoyed. A level of upward mobility unknown and throughout human history. All of this is a product of choices that were made by people, many of whom stood in platforms such as this and in a building such as in this very building before we came here. And the result of those difficult and important decisions that were made by those that were here in the past was what is known today as the American century. And the question before us in power and politics today, and all Americans, is whether we want the next century to be an American century as well. It comes at a time when Americans are looking at their lives and are really concerned and worried about the future. Their gas prices are extraordinary. As they're getting ready to go on family vacations, they're paying more than they've ever paid in their lives to fill their tank. So sometimes they're not filling their tank. They're filling a quarter tank. I saw people this week putting $5 and $3 and $8 in their gas tank because of how difficult it is to do it these days. And the reason is because our government has no energy policy. It has energy politics, but it has no energy policy. They look at job creation. It doesn't exist in America. Jobs aren't being created at the pace they need to be created. And the reason is that America's government gets in the way of the people that create jobs. And they look at the future of our government and of our spending, and they realize that you cannot continue to spend money you do not have. You cannot continue to spend at $1.6 trillion a year more than what you have and hope to achieve another American century. And that's what this budget's about. Now, I've only been here 5 months. We've been here 5 months. Just long enough to have figured out that as soon as we're done here, you will get emails from our friends on the other side of the aisle and outside of this building that will immediately attack this budget with all kinds. They've been working on it, I imagine, all week. And that's fine. That's important. That's an important part of our process. I hope that when they email you their talking points, they also email you their budget proposal, their ideas for how our government should go moving forward. Because if their plan is to keep doing what they're doing now, then their plan is bankruptcy. Then their plan is denying the American people the opportunity to achieve the next American century. Their plan is not serious. Their plan, what they're basically telling you is that they believe that their political careers and their political party and the next election is more important than our country and its future. And I think for people like Pat Toomey and others who stand up and offer proposals such as this, I think these proposals should be met with counter-proposals and their own ideas about how to proceed moving forward. Because what I think every serious-minded person in this building and in this city knows is that if we keep doing what we are doing now, not only will we not have another American century, we will be the first Americans in the history of our country that will leave our children worse off than ourselves, a distinction I don't believe any of us want to be a part of. So the time to begin to act on these issues is now, and I'm proud to be associated with measures such as this, and I hope we'll meet with success because a lot is riding on it.